for now, our final speaker, and we're so grateful that he came all the way here to California for us. This is Ethan Brown, and yeah. And I don't know if anybody saw him on CBS this morning. It was incredible, and he schooled Charlie Rose. It was it was great because Charlie Rose asked, are you telling us not to eat meat anymore? And he said, no, of course not. I'm just saying don't eat animal protein. And Charlie Rose didn't get it. He was like, oh, okay. It was great. So he is the CEO and co-founder of Beyond Meat. Grew up with a deep appreciation for animals and the planet. Ethan's passions shaped the direction of his adult life with the internet of helping to create a better world. He embarked on the successful career in clean energy. Yet Ethan felt a need to make a bigger impact. As a committed vegan, he often wondered if the staggering amount of animal protein consumed could be reduced if a perfect plant-based meat replication existed. The pursuit of this goal led to the creation of Beyond Meat, a company with noteworthy investors, including Bill Gates and the founder of Twitter. Please welcome Ethan Brown.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thanks, guys. Appreciate you guys having me here. Thank you so much. You always try to start out by offering something personal, but this one is not something that I fondly remember. This room reminds me a lot of graduate school, and I was a teaching assistant in an economics course, and the teacher I had taken it with, who's actually got her PhD here at Berkeley, was into all sorts of fun things about knocking microeconomics and just sort of showing the inconsistencies and everything. It was a great course. The next year when I came back and I was a teaching assistant, it was a completely different professor, and he was just hardcore mathematics. And so one of the first sessions that I taught was the Lagrangian multiplier, which is like a very complex, for me anyway, formula, and I didn't know it. And I had to get in a room that was just full of people like this, and I just didn't have time to prepare and everything. And I can remember that I overheard a woman in the front room saying, "He keeps looking at his notes." And so, I've endeavored to be more prepared today. But anyway, this room is a little bit reminiscent and daunting. But I have something fun to talk about, so that'll hopefully make this easier. So Beyond Meat. We are committed to providing meat to consumers in a way that takes the animal completely out of the equation. And exciting. Thank you guys very much for that. Appreciate it. And what's so interesting about this, and I'll talk about it later in the presentation, is we try to create a real distinction around what meat is versus where it's from. And we think a lot about what meat is in terms of its constituent parts. And looking at what is in meat, and that's basically amino acids, it's lipids, it's water, it's predominantly water, about 70% water, it's trace minerals and trace carbohydrates. All of those things can be found in the animal kingdom, and if they can be put together, assembled in a way that's exactly the same as animal muscle, at the end of the day, it's hard to argue that isn't meat. Now, if someone's stuck on the fact that meat comes from cows and pigs and chickens, that's something we have to work with them around. But if you look at simply what meat is, it can be created from the plant kingdom. So we had an initial success about 2 years ago launching a chicken product that employed these principles. We worked on a high moisture extrusion platform that allowed us to realign proteins so they mimic the fibrous texture of muscle. We launched this in Whole Foods in the prepared food section in 2012. In 2013, we then launched it as a retail item. Just this past spring, or this spring rather, we launched a beef product. And what's super exciting about this beef product is that we wanted to give a nod to what we think is the future of protein, which is a protein diversity. We used only pea protein for this. We could have done it years ago with soy, but we spent 3 or 4 years trying to create this just out of pea protein. And for me, it's not that pea protein is new. It's the concept that, if you start to look outside of the agricultural commodity market and you start to look to plants for the sake of protein, there's just a massive number that are available, whether it's mustard seed, camelina, lupin, et cetera. And so pea protein has the most commercial scale right now, so we use that. But as we move forward, we're looking at everything from yeast all the way through to, as I mentioned, mustard seed. We've gotten a lot of positive press, which has been it's a real blessing. One of the most interesting experiences I had through this journey is working with Mark Bittman in the New York Times. I mean, he very much celebrates the culinary experience of meat, but he was kind enough to invite us into his home, and we trialed 6 or 7 dishes with him. And he wasn't able to tell the difference between our product and animal meat in many different instances. And so for that reason, he wrote a very positive article about us about 2 years ago, and that really helped the company establish itself. But since then, we've gotten a lot of press, and I think what's interesting about this is not necessarily, just because of what we're doing. I think there's a time here, and there's that quote by Victor Hugo that nothing is more powerful than an idea as time has come. People are looking for this, and so you can feel the momentum at your back. You can feel the positive sense that people are hoping to embrace this. It's okay, don't worry. Take your time. I'll just pause for a second. Don't worry at all. It happens to me all the time.
Joe, I never turn my phone on.
Don't worry.
Why it's on today, I don't know. It's full time. I'm very, very...
Please don't worry. Don't worry. I'm the last guy you got to worry about. Don't worry about it. don't worry about it at all. Okay. So, but I love this to start. It's simple, and it's sort of like, okay, well, here's Tyson grilled strips, and then here's cooked lean beef, and if we get it right and we can actually make the claim with all sincerity the texture is the same, why would you have the animal version of this, right? And so that's what we need to educate consumers about, that there's such a benefit from just a strictly self-interested perspective to making the change and educating people about this. But you'd be surprised how few people actually know about these very simple facts. Okay, so I never get to talk to groups like you guys where there's sort of a similarity in thought. I often am speaking to people that are much more carnivorous, and so and then it's sort of intimidating because I want to add value to the discussion here and not just sort of preach to the choir. And so I use this as an opportunity to think about trying to put how I think about these things into more of a intellectual framework than emotional, because for me it really is emotional. Like my drive for all of this is very simple. People always ask, well, why are you doing this? And it just gets back to very simple observations I made as a kid around the lack of differences between my dog and the animals that I had seen in the barn and that we interacted with at our family farm. And so, but that's not very kind of compelling as an overall philosophy or framework. And so I've tried to give some thought to how to articulate it in a way that is meaningful from kind of the intellectual frameworks that we use as people who debate these subjects. So, as I run my tongue across my teeth, I do think it's disingenuous I'm reminded of the fact that it's disingenuous to suggest that meat is not very important as part of our evolution. It is something that shaped who we are. And so I'll talk a little bit about that. But at the same time, we as humans and myself as a person, I think are always striving for some level of internal coherence. So while we may have evolved eating meat, we also have this part of our brain that says, this is not right, it's not okay to be harming another creature that feels pain. And so we've come up with various ways to cope with that. One is a sort of evolutionary tool around disassociation. Psychopaths have it to the extreme. Some people have it more than others, but the idea that you can separate out the impact of your consequences on other beings is in part an evolutionary tool that we use to allow ourselves to fight other tribes, to slaughter animals, etc. But then we went ahead and really got serious about 2,000 years ago in religion, and particularly in the Western world, right? We codified all this in, particularly in Genesis. So I'll talk a little about that. And then science sort of heaped on and piled onto the fun, and Descartes and Bacon and all these guys sort of talked about the mechanization of the animal world and of the natural kingdom and the spiritual separation and the specialness of man. And so, if you look at that, if you look at the fact we evolved from consuming meat, and I'll get into that and what that means, and then we set up all of these elaborate frameworks that justified our consumption of meat, you can start to think about how difficult it is to pull away from meat as a society, and how difficult it is to sell into a culture that has such reverence and treats meat as such a centerpiece of of the human experience. A guy that did a lot of damage to all of the kind of frameworks we set up was obviously Darwin, and the idea that if instead of descending from heaven, we ascended from mud, and that there is no real separateness between us and the other creatures that inhabit the planet. So we'll talk a little about that and what that means from a perspective of ethics and how to relate to one another. And then my favorite subject is 2.0, which is our research projects, and we have I brought some T-shirts to show this. I had these made for all of our scientists, and this is this year, and they have to wear these. Chicken 2.0, and then they got a little cow here with a cape and stuff, and beef 2.0. So my son wears these, and he's like 9 years old, and people always think, well, why is your son walking around with beef on his shirt? It's like sort of ironic, and I have to explain that it's not the same meaning. Okay. So the Garden of Evolution. I wrote it this way because I was particularly interested in the way that our actual evolution seemed to mirror the sort of the script that is given in the Garden of Eden. That we actually did evolve from chimpanzees that were largely vegetarian. Right, there's a small amount of meat that they would consume. So, like in Genesis, we were first vegetarian and then flesh eating. But the environment about 3 million years ago in Africa changed from one where it was a lot of forest cover and canopies where the chimpanzees could live this type of lifestyle, to one that was more characterized by grasslands. And as that change occurred, our species sort of split into two basic camps. One was something called a robust anthro, and then the second being the species that we're from, the Homo sapien, or the predecessor to the Homo sapien. And those two strains kind of developed separately to the point where we became what we are today, Homo sapiens. And our strain took heavily into animal protein and fats. And in fact, the strain that was the robust anthros had much larger jaws, larger guts, and predominantly subsisted on grasslands. But they went extinct. And so this process of consuming meat, it set into cycle a sort of a virtuous cycle where we would consume more meat, and that would allow less energy to go to our guts because it's easier to digest, and more energy to go to our brains, which meant our brains increased from a period of about 2 million to about 200,000 years ago, from about 600 cubic centimeters to about 1,300 cubic centimeters. And as that happened, we were able to form more complex social relationships. We were able to spend more time hunting. Less time chewing. Like a chimpanzee, for example, will chew up to half of its day. Like they'll spend 12 hours out of 24 just simply chewing. I think we've replaced that by talking today, but and so all of these occurrences allowed us to continue to develop, and for me that's sort of awkward, right? Because I believe so strongly that we shouldn't be eating animals. So it took me a long time to try to reconcile. But the facts are there. I mean, the sites they've discovered in Kenya and in Tanzania particularly, where there'll be, about 2 million years ago, there would be, large findings of antelope, and then later wild beast. And these were occurring over hundreds, if not thousands of years. They'd find that looked like the hominids were consuming these. So it wasn't something that was temporary. They was actually finding layer after layer of carcass. So for me, I said, okay, fine. So it played a huge role in how we developed in the way our bodies are formed. So we have a debt to this awful process of eating other beings, right? But it's not just our intellect that was supported by this. Even the way that we conduct ourselves today, the way our bodies are built. Chimpanzee, for example, can't throw a ball as well as a human being. And that's because of the development of how we're throwing spears. And the way that our waist turns, and the fact that our shoulders open to the side versus up. So all these things that as humans, we developed from this process of being predators. And so to me, I kept coming back to, okay, so how do you reconcile that with the thought that, you shouldn't be doing this, that this is somehow morally wrong, right? So I'll get into how I thought about that. So I think how most people thought about it was through this concept of dominion, that even though it might have felt sort of strange to be doing this, that it was something that we were basically called to do. We were given dominion over the earth. And that's been the traditional narrative. My children are in Catholic school, that's certainly what they're being taught. And it continues to be the theme today. But then this brilliant guy named Darwin comes along, right? And it's interesting, he came right on the heels of Descartes and then Francis Bacon, et cetera. And to me, there's nothing more profound than what he discovered, right? It's this sense that there's no separateness at all, that this idea that we are different and special as humans is more of a fiction than anything else. And I wanted to read a little bit from The Descent of Man because it had such an impression on me in terms of trying to create an intellectual framework for thinking about why it's morally wrong to consume animal protein. So I'll just read from one particular passage I think is important. So some naturalists, from being deeply impressed with the mental and spiritual powers of man, have divided the whole organic world into three kingdoms: the human, the animal, and the vegetable, thus giving to man a separate kingdom. Spiritual powers cannot be compared or classed by the naturalist, but he may endeavor to show, as I have done, that the mental faculties of man and the lower animal do not differ in kind, although immensely in degree. A difference in degree, however great, does not justify us in placing the man in a distinct kingdom. So it's trying to find help to interpret this and apply it to the world that I live in. I looked around for authors that had thought about this and found a guy named James Rachel. Is anyone ever familiar with his work? It was like impossible to find his books, right? I had to order one from a used bookstore on Amazon. But it was very profound. He was a professor at Alabama, so not necessarily the hotbed for vegan ethics. But here's what he thought when he thought about Darwin. He said, if Darwin is correct, there are no absolute differences between humans and members of all other species. In fact, there are no absolute differences between members of any species and all others. Rather than sharp breaks between species, we find instead a profusion of similarities between particular animals, with the characteristics typical of one species shading over into the characteristics typical of another. As Darwin puts it, there are only degrees of difference, a complex pattern of similarities and differences that reflect common ancestry as well as chance variations among individuals within a single species. Therefore, the fundamental reality is best characterized by saying the Earth is populated by different kinds of beings. So I think this, even though I had no sense of this when I was a small child, was what I was feeling when I was looking at my dog and I was looking at the cows in the barn and saying, there really isn't enough of a difference for me to justify cuddling one and killing the other. And that was being reinforced to me because I grew up in the 80s, and there's still a lot of the civil rights work. My parents had been involved in that, and my teachers, of course. I went to a Quaker school, and it was something that was still very much in the discourse. So we would have these sessions, where they divide the class into brown-eyed children and blue-eyed children, and they would just treat like the blue-eyed children horribly, right? They deny them everything, and et cetera. And it was a lesson in racism. But the point they were making, right, was that if you pick a superficial difference and deny people rights based on that difference, that's not right. That's wrong. And it sort of violates one of the most fundamental principles of equality, even established by Aristotle, that you should treat like things in a similar fashion. And so I think what I was thinking when I was looking at the difference between my dog and the cow is exactly that there are tons of differences here, but none of them are morally relevant. And I think that becomes, for me, the foundation of how I think about why animals and people deserve basically a similar set of rights within certain conditions. Then I had to think about, okay, well, people ask me, well, how do I think about this more generally? And I was looking around for some philosophers that resonated with me, and Albert, not Fat Albert, but Albert Schweitzer came to mind, right? And my grandfather was a minister, and he loved Albert Schweitzer. And I was messing around in my dad's office one day, not too long ago, maybe 5, 6 years ago, and I found a book that my grandfather had given to my dad, and the page was bookmarked to Reverence for Life by Schweitzer. And that to me made all the sense in the world, and he provided the only answer I've ever believed with respect to thinking about whether or not you can harm an animal. And his answer was, you can, but it's completely arbitrary. It's an arbitrary exercise of power. If you do it, you have to realize you're being arbitrary. It doesn't fit. Dominion doesn't get you out of it. Francis Bacon doesn't get you out of it. Descartes. All that stuff is a theoretical framework that is a story and potentially something that can alleviate the stress that you feel over it. But at the end of the day, it's an arbitrary exercise of power. And to me, that sounded a lot like the truth. Okay. So all this fun stuff, what do you guys think this number stands for? Yeah. Anyway, so that's the number of animals in the agriculture system slaughtered every year, right, globally, and billion. Yeah, yeah. There's only 66. Yeah. So, if you kind of believe Schweitzer and Darwin and all this, it's a big fucking mistake. I mean, that's just horrible. If these are beings that have the same capacity for pain, for companionship, and everything else, which from everything I've just talked about, is true. It's a giant mistake what we're doing, right? And one that has, to me personally, religious ramifications, because I think it's not the right way to treat other beings. But then, what's interesting is this statistic. Any sense of what this is? Okay, so 3 out of 10. So, and I love the sort of karmic reality of this, that animal protein consumption is linked to 3 of the top 10 mortality drivers, right? So heart disease, diabetes, and cancer, right? So again, it gets back to how strong this role we have with animal protein is in our society. It's at the center of our plate, yet we know that it's killing us, right? Yet we continue to eat it. And that gets back to, I think, its role in evolution, its role in religion, et cetera. But 3 out of 10. If you stopped the consumption of animal protein, you'd make a massive gain in these areas, something you guys know. 51%. What about that? Anyone got an idea there? What's that? I'm not sure. Maybe. Exactly. Yeah. So it's the role that livestock plays in greenhouse gas emissions. So it's one more than half of the problem, right? And tragically, the lead scientist behind this, Robert Goodland, who was not wearing Birkenstocks and having long hair here in Berkeley, but was working at the World Bank for 23 years. He did this study and found that the UN, in all its wisdom, forgot to add, or didn't forget, but decided to ignore the fact that animals breathe. And that when animals breathe, they're respiring carbon. And there are an unnatural number of animals on the Earth's surface, and they're all respiring carbon. And that needs to be counted in the calculus, he said. Makes sense. Tragically, he died in December, coming back from the Himalayas. And he's a very thoughtful, brilliant guy. But his colleague, Jeff Anang, continues to work on this. But I really believe that number. So again, there's some sort of karmic connection here where the fact that we're using animals for bioreactors for protein is not only harming our bodies, but is harming the earth in a way that can't be repaired. What about that? Other than, isn't it a Leonard Skinner song, 45? Is that it? Yeah, exactly. It works every time. That is the amount of the global land surface that's attributed to livestock. So, you know, they're docile, right? But they're greedy as hell. You know, like a cow is like a really sweet being, you know, but they just require an enormous amount of resources. And so from a very selfish perspective, it's, again, not a very good thing. I talked about this at the beginning, but I'm fascinated by this point. You know, if you're hung up on where meat is from, we're not going to get very far. But if you are just willing to look at meat in terms of what meat is, right? And that's where I think we start to get toward a solution. If you think about meat perspective, again, from its amino acids, its lipids, its water, its trace minerals and trace carbohydrates. Those things can all be assembled in exactly the same structure they are in animal muscle. We're not there yet, but it can be done, and the science can do that. We can do it with all natural inputs and do it with using natural forces. I'd be really hard pressed to say that's not meat. Some people say, well, no, it has to have cow or chicken, but again, if you think about it, it's possible that you can just have meat, but it just comes all from plants. So this is the work that we do, and I had to block out this bottom part because we're doing some filings around it. But it's an MRI of our product and an MRI of chicken breast. And so we can study the structural changes and then try to get closer to them. The top one is just a simple picture of them. But again, you know, it's not outside of the grasp of science to basically recreate meat and just do it directly from plants. How we do it, and we get a lot of criticism about sort of processed foods and everything, which I find awesome. I just love that. And I love when people do it over like a glass of wine or beer. Because it's like being some of the more older processed things that we consume, you know, or in a sandwich that they're eating that has bread, you know. So we use heating, cooling, and pressure. We apply those in a very rapid cascading fashion to the protein, and it literally interlinks them and realigns them in a way that mimics how they are in muscle. And you know, we're getting closer and closer to understanding it more and more. That's why we have these 2.0 projects. We'll have next year with 3.0. We're not there yet, but we don't see any fundamental block to making it all work. So those are natural forces, and we're using only natural inputs. We go to whole foods first before we consider any ingredients. Yeah. Okay, so 25 by 20 is a campaign that we've kicked off earlier this year, and it's something that has been met with, you know, some chuckles and things like that, and just people are skeptical of it, and I agree that it's naive. It's basically a campaign to reduce animal protein consumption 25% by the year 2020 globally, and you know, that sounds pretty lofty, and you know, particularly with China and India, it's going the other direction. But I think it's important to state what's necessary, and you know, and then let the political process, you know, do the other. But I didn't want to. I tried to get it to be 25 by 25, but Jeff Anang, guy I mentioned earlier, said, you know, there's no scientific basis for that. I said that the window is sort of closing between 2017 and 2020 on making the changes we need, and thereafter it's going to be too hard to basically get the horse back into the barn. So we stuck with it and said 25 by 20, which is tough, but again, you know, stranger things have happened. You know, the collapse of communism, you know, the spread of the Judeo-Christian ethic. You know, I mean, these things do happen, and you need to set a stake and try to work toward them. But to show you how daunting that is, I think some other, yeah, here we go. So let me see. So Africa, where it sort of all began, is relatively flat in terms of its consumption of animal protein. But look at China. So, and look at the corresponding decline in China's cereals and the rise in Chinese meat consumption. And so that's what we have to change, as well as our culture here. We can't export our own lunacy, right? But we're doing it. And we're doing it out of Virginia and North Carolina with Smithfield. And you know, there's a certain irony in that, the Smithfield acquisition by the Chinese. I mean, they're now sort of polluting our rivers, and I think they're saying, you know, we're coming after your rivers now. You've been doing it to ours. So anyway, it's sort of a mess. But we gotta show some leadership here at home and do that first, and start that 25 by 20. So how we're articulating this is a vision. We're encouraging schools, institutions, and others to gradually make this reduction so that we have a global 25% reduction by the year 2020. Again, I know it's naive, but it's important. Some other things I wanted to cover. I thought this is sort of interesting just from a technological perspective. This is the broiler process. On the left, it takes 6 or 7 weeks. It takes 2 minutes to run our process. And so when you think about it that way, you think about all the, we're 15 times more water efficient, 7 times more feed efficient. We can drive the cost below the cost of animal protein, which I think is important, and 35 times more land efficient. It's a big market. The Americans spend $188 billion a year on animal protein. So what's exciting is that people are looking at it now as an economic opportunity to displace animal protein. And I think the science is going to get there. It's cultural is the biggest problem. It's how do you separate meat from flesh? How do you get people to think about meat as a composition of protein and fats versus something that came from an animal? And to me, I think some of the solution here is around what they did with milk. And in the 80s, milk was, so my dad is a professor, and we had a lot of time on the weekends in the summer, which he chose to take the family out to our farm. And so I grew up in the city, I grew up in Washington, but we spent a lot of time on our farm there, and we had 100 head of Holstein cattle. And it was really hard to compete against the milk providers, and we were in Maryland. And so the milk guys in the Midwest had all these subsidies, and they also had subsidized fuel, which back then was really cheap. So it was a difficult market to compete in, but the milk industry overall was also very depressed because they hadn't figured out that people had shifted to, instead of taking a gallon home from the supermarket, they were now buying like 16 ounces or 12 ounces, and that became the way that people were drinking fluids. And milk just missed that. And so their market share just got really, really decimated. So they said, okay, we got to do something to make this come back. So we're going to create a campaign. And so they created the Got Milk campaign, which I'm sure everyone's familiar here. So, you can't go to a gym, at least where I'm from, without seeing a picture of like Derek Jeter, or into a cafeteria and you see Taylor Swift and they got their little milk mustache. I think it's ludicrous that you can get into a school and market directly to kids for one particular type of protein, but you can. And so if you can, why not do it for plant protein? And I think that's what we need. We need to educate the people that are coming out of the schools that this is the cleanest source of protein for their body. So we've done just that. I go to schools and talk quite a bit about it. We're signing up athletes and celebrities to endorse plant-based protein, to have exactly that Got Milk campaign, to try to move the needle a little bit in terms of culture and marketing. So I think that's about it. Thank you. Yes.
I don't think 25-20 is unrealistic at all.
Well, it's awesome. Great. Thank you.
I think we should worry about that.
Cool.
What was the statement?
A lot of people have said, and it doesn't reflect well on us to advocate this 25 by 20 because it's so unrealistic.
Yeah, and so what was the comment?
Just supporting us.
Supporting us.
Yeah, supporting. Yeah.
I'm just saying it's not. I think it could be 2020
I hope.
or 25-20.
Yeah. Got it. Go ahead.
I have a question about your product. I was excited to see that you have a beef crumble.
Yeah.
I'm opening a vegan restaurant in the city.
Oh, great.
Do you
Yeah.
distribute a wholesale and in bulk? And is it
Yes.
UNFI?
Yep.
Okay.
Cool. Great. Thanks. Sure. That was cool. Go ahead.
There's a little cafe right across the corner here, and it was really great yesterday because I said, well, I have to go get a cup of tea. And I said, oh, do you know who's coming to the conference tomorrow? He's from Brad. So one thing I
Thank
wanted
you.
to know, oh, really? Oh, well, we sell his products.
Oh, great. Good.
And they said, on the windows it said burger and vegan and vegetarian. And they said, yes, but we have the burger up there, but they don't know they're eating Beyond Meat.
Okay, good.
So
Great.
that's really good.
It is nice. That is great. It is great.
Say it again. 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 Say
So just saying, there's a I think it's a Saturn Cafe. Is that, yeah, up the street that serves our product, and just a note of appreciation there. Go ahead. Yep.
How do you see influencing developing countries with the product?
Right, great question. And I think it's about speed to market, and so we looked at a lot of different approaches, like whether we license the technology to others, but in the developing world, so there's a big association, as you know, between affluence and meat consumption. So more affluent, higher meat consumption. If we can get in and disrupt the pricing of the animal protein market in a lot of these countries, I think we can get early progress. So that's why we're looking at things like yeast as a source of protein that are very, very low cost, that could get in there. And so, because people do pay attention a lot to price, so price is one lever we're trying to pull. Go ahead.
Are you a publicly traded company? Yeah.
We are not. We're not. No. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Go ahead.
I asked what you said for 0.45, and that's my first question.
Just the amount of the global land surface that is allocated to livestock, either through feed or through direct grazing.
And then my second question is, I actually asked it to the previous speaker, to the colleague Patrick. I was going to ask, I saw the movie Noah last week, and I thought there was a very strong animal, not using animals message there,
Mm-hmm.
especially for people who claim they have dominion over animals. So do you think you can, like, since that movie will reach millions and millions of people all over the world, do you think you can, like, maybe, like, take some of the messages in that movie and
That's a great idea. Yeah, and I mean and also more broadly, that's the way people communicate today, right? Is through that type of media. And I think one of the reasons that we're seeing, anyway, we are seeing more people become vegetarian or vegan is social media. I mean, it's so easy now to send around a clip that's disturbing, that shows the impact of food choices. So kids are just watching these on their phones, whereas before it had to be some sort of covert PETA distribution of something, and now it's just flying around social media. Yeah. Go ahead.
What are your thoughts on lab-grown meat, and do you think that potentially could be a threat to your product?
Right. I'm a fan of it for sure, but I think the challenge is this, and T. Colin Campbell. If you read the China study, it's hard to wonder, but I'm a fan of it because anything that, but it's just tough to get around that.
What was the question?
Sorry, I'll repeat them. Sorry, guys. Sorry. This was just lab-grown meat and whether I was in favor of it, and I am certainly very strongly in favor of it, but I just think the challenge they have to answer is, this health thing and the China study, basically. Yeah. Go ahead.
If you're not a publicly traded company, are you going to be? Or second question is the extractive process. Do you use hexane or any of the nasty chemicals to create your basic components?
Yeah. No, okay, good. So on the first question, that's a big question on the mind of our investors. So I try to stay out of the way on that one. But on the hexane, so for our beef product, it's peas, and it's not an aqueous separation process, so there's no hexane used. For the chicken, which uses both pea and soy protein, the soy protein does come from a process that's aqueous that uses hexane, but we've done an enormous amount of work on that in terms of the amount of residual hexane, and it's something like less than the amount in a natural apple. So it is what it is. Go ahead.
So I love your product.
Thank you.
We discovered it a couple months ago, and I'm very happy to have it.
Thank you.
But for some people, you'll try to serve them the product, and they're like, oh, but this isn't natural.
Right. Yeah. Yes.
I love that response from
Yeah.
people, because I want to be like, well, and you think the process of factory farming
Right.
your meat is natural.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm sure you've encountered that process in that conversation, and I mean, what would you say to people?
And that was sort of my trepidation about speaking today, was that you guys have the same answers. I mean, that's what I would say.
Yeah.
And I would also say that if they're comfortable eating bread, for example, drinking wine, beer, etc. I mean, it's sort of, And my other point is more of a sort of classist point on this, in the sense that it might that sort of organic, locally raised might be good for the Hamptons and for Martha's Vineyard, but for sort of mainstream Americans that are struggling to pay the bills, it's not viable, right? Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
How do you address this sort of, a lot of vegans, when they first go vegan, or people first go vegetarian or vegan, they usually look for meat and cheese substitutes. And then after a while, they start eating more beans and things that
Right.
have nothing to do with what looks like meat.
Right.
And so how do you say, I know probably your market is like people who are currently eating meat who maybe aren't even interested in becoming vegetarians, they just want to eat
Right.
less meat. But how would you address that? Is that a phenomenon? Am I?
No, it's yeah. So the question is this is in some ways a lot of vegans will they'll start by eating something that's similar to meat or to animal protein, and then they'll gravitate to more lower down on the food chain, so to speak, in terms of beans and legumes and everything else. And is that a problem for us? And it's really not. I mean, it's in part because of the second part of what you said, which is we're targeting meat reducers. And so it's this category which, if we were to get any portion of this in any significant way, it would make a big dent. But it's all, I have a personal answer to that too, is that I have two children, age 8 and 9. And my wife grew up in a rural area in Pennsylvania. And so needless to say, our discussions on diet are somewhat interesting. And so, wanting to stay married our kids, they're not going to eat quinoa and kale every day, and they're not going to. They're not going to be packed, these carefully chickpea lunches and things. And so, my view on this is you have to, if you really want to make a dent, you got to make the things that people eat plant-based versus trying to make them plant-based, right? Yeah. Go ahead.
Do you have a lot of manufacturing plants all over, or you just have one area? And how many employees do you currently have?
So we have about 60 employees, and we have a manufacturing facility in Missouri. Yeah. Go ahead.
I saw through social media you were at some sort of conference or something, and you did like a play on Taco Bell's.
Yeah.
Are
Yeah.
you planning to try to get Taco Bell to have your?
Yeah, so that was really fun. So we did get a response from them, which was a cease and desist letter. So it's really hard to go down and take stuff down across the internet too. So we had to go out and try to find all of the. But it was really fun. So we had a bell and everything, and it was fun in two ways. One, we were at a natural foods conference. People were like, what is Taco Bell doing here? And then second, I was like, oh, it's all plant based. But it did start a discussion with them. So we'll see where it goes. But yeah, it was a sales call. That's what we're doing. Yeah, go ahead.
I believe I saw you on television. Would that have been you with Charlie Rose was one of the people questioning you?
Yes.
And I was impressed with how carefully you skated on ice, and you were very interested. It seemed like I was annoyed with I think there were 3 people questioning you, and it seemed like they had been given orders beforehand. Well, you're not saying don't eat meat.
Right.
And you were very good.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
But it seemed like very obvious, like almost as if they'd been told beforehand, make sure that no slight idea comes out that there's anything wrong with eating meat.
Right.
Your approach was like, no, I'm not saying don't eat meat, but just this is something that's good to eat.
Exactly.
This
Yeah.
is another thing. And I believe there was something where is there some funding or backing of what you're doing with Bill Gates, and can you say anything about that?
Yeah. No. Yeah, absolutely. So he's been great. He is. Investor in the company, and I've had an opportunity to sit down with him twice. And it was funny that the first time that I sat down with him, the guys who's put together the meeting made me really nervous. They were like, he's going to, and I mentioned this in the interview, but not the story behind it. He's going to ask you a lot about some particular number in your presentation, like one of these numbers, and he's going to have you do the math on the spot, and you're not going to get it, and you're not going to get the money. All right. So that's cool. And then so right before that, 3 guys walked out in like rumpled suits, and I was like, wow, this is really terrible. And so I also hadn't worn a suit. I was wearing like something nice, but not a suit. So I was like, okay, not great. So go in, and of course the upside is he was a super nice guy. All he wanted to talk about was the food, and he kept asking, is there meat in this? Is there chicken in this? Is there beef in this? And then he talked about the kids a lot, you know. I mean, and he just came across as like a super thoughtful, caring guy. And then the second meeting we had with him, a similar thing, but for him, he actually does have a concern around animals. Like he does mention that as one of the things that, you know, he doesn't lead with it. It's more about global nutrition and things, but you can tell it's important to him. He's not vegan or vegetarian or anything of that nature, but it was just interesting to me. He was very focused on price from his own experience. He said, you know, if you can underprice meat and license this into the developing world, you could really try to change things. So.
One last question for
Sure.
Karen.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to know about promotion. When I watch television at night, all I see are advertisements for Sonic and all this.
Right.
You know, that's everything.
Right.
And the only advertising I see for any vegan products that that is effective advertising, and fairly frequently it's shown, is for silk products.
Right, yeah.
So I want to know, do you see the time coming when Beyond Meat and meat, we don't even like the word alternatives in
Sure.
all these ways that suggest that this is somehow only a substitute or whatever.
Right.
But do you see the day when the media are going to be blitzing the same glamour, the same coolness, the same deliciousness?
Yeah, great question.
Do you see that?
It's a one I think about all the time, again, because I look back at the sort of role in evolution, look back at the role in religion, everything, and I think, you know, if we're going to unseat this, we really have to be smart about it and how we market it. And so I have a collaborative approach to all this. I was with Hillshire at their facility one day, and they have one of the posters from their ad campaigns there. It says, "Man is easier fed than understood," and it was for Jimmy Dean sausage, right? And you know, a lot of stuff in that. You know, and then you look at Arby's and the whole. Have you ever seen those Arby's commercials where it's a woman, you know, sort of in a bikini, you know, and it's dripping? And yeah, I mean, there's a lot about that, right? And so where I think this segment has gone wrong is not embracing the culture around meat and just saying, you know, this is a different source of amino acids, but it is meat, because you know, I don't know if you remember I've become a student of this stuff because it's important. The Super Bowl ad where the guy's grilling up quinoa burgers, and he says, "My girlfriend's burger." He's in the parking lot of a football game. You know, it's viewed as sort of weak and feminine, and you know, and we have to completely jettison that and embrace plant protein as a vibrant, healthy source of protein for, you know, muscle mass. For, you know, we can't cede that to the animal protein market. We have to basically take it back. And so yes, and in fact, Silk, their marketing guy now works for us. So yeah. Cool. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Yes, thank you to Ethan Brown. Wonderful.